Hey guys, this is College Bing. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Hanwei Practical Gongfu Sword. Now that's kind of a mouthful, but basically it's just a Hanwei Dao or an oxtail saber. Now before we get into it, down in the comments below, tell me what kind of Dao or saber is your favorite. It could be from China, it could be from anywhere. As long as it's single-edged, it's better than double-edged. Now go ahead and tell me down below what you like. First I'll start by talking about the components of the sword with regard to details and historical accuracy. And then I'll go outside, cut some bottles, and, then I'll tell you whether or not I think this sword is, what its value is. If we take a look at the scabbard, we can see that they have these, stylized cloud motif fittings, they were super popular back in the late Qing dynasty, like the 19th century. But the scabbard isn't the most historically accurate because it's made of plastic, and that actually has the advantage of being more weatherproof than wood, but you should know going in that it's not the most historical design. Also, you'll notice this scabbard has a big slit all along the bottom where it's actually open and exposed. And it's designed that way so that whenever you pull the sword out, this is an oxtail saber. So the end of the sword is wider than the base of the sword. And that design just allows the sword to slide in and out of the scabbard pretty quickly and easily. However, all of the antiques that I have seen from the 19th century don't have that design. And I actually know that there were other changes made to scabbards in order to, facilitate a wider end of the blade. So, that's just something. It is true that in the 20th century, that kind of slit became very common, and nowadays is basically the standard, but it's not necessarily something that was so common in the past. The oxtail saber blade design becomes popular in the late 19th century, and it was never used by the military, but it was actually used by civilians. And there's a bunch of reasons as why that might be. We're not totally sure. But in general, they think that the design widens out to the end in order to put more weight towards the tip so you have a better cut. But at the same time, the blade is actually not that thick. So what you do is you put weight out here without making it too thick so it can still slice through things quite easily. And that's kind of the philosophy of why this sword is shaped like it is. Going on down the blade, we can see that it has this ovular disc guard. Now, most disc guards in the past were a little more circular than that. This one's a little bit ovular, but it's not that big a deal because you can find these pretty commonly too. And if we keep moving on down, we can see that the handle has these rounded fittings like the pommel and the ferrule. But then that's very common for the time too. Basically, back in the 18th century, they had what's called fang shi, or angular style fittings, which are a lot more square, and the handle itself was square. But over the course of the 18th century and into the 19th century, that became less and less popular, and yuan shi, or rounded style fittings, became the norm. So this represents yuan shi, but it should be said that, many yuan shi had a circular pommel, like a spherical pommel, but Hanwei Dao in particular appear to have commonly adopt this type of pommel which just flares out towards the end. And that means that you won't lose your sword as easily, so that's pretty useful. One thing I will say is that, it's nice that they have this cord grip rep, and the cord feels pretty nice and it gives you a pretty good grip, but I'm not the person with the biggest hands ever, and this grip, it's a little bit wide, so it's not always easy. It feels a little wider. I can definitely feel a difference between this Dao and the other Dao that I own. So it's not as comfortable and as easy to manipulate. It's a little bit fat for my hand, basically. So moving on to the very bottom of the handle, we have this nut which screws onto the tang, and it means that it's not the most historical design. Historically, they would have gotten the iron hot and hammered it down and flattened it out so the handle can't come off. But this design is very easy to change and repair and stuff like that. So if the handle starts rattling, I can just tighten it down, or if something breaks, I can take it apart much easier. And that's a pretty good idea on swords that are intended to be cut with a lot, because this is a cutting sword, and it's a fairly stiff blade. It doesn't wobble too much like many other modern wushu dao. So this blade is also a little bit short. It's just under 28 inches. And the thing is, that's actually something I like about this sword because it's pretty historical. And in reality, you can find a lot of modern swords which have blades which are well over 30 inches. And that's just not really something that existed in the past. You might say that, modern Westerners are generally quite a bit taller than, Chinese people in the 19th century because there's a lot of famine that time and stuff. And that might be true, but I still think it's hard to generalize a lot of that stuff. And for myself, I'm just like, 5'8", 5'9", so I'm not even that tall. And a sword like this is well within the parameters of what's usable. Also, one other thing about sword length and blade length and stuff is that if we look at something like the European Messer, it's also quite short. And the fact is that a lot of these choppy, one-handed or single-edged cutting blades aren't always as long as, like a rapier. So in my opinion, the blade length is pretty good. Another thing is the weight. It's just under 2 pounds. That's well within historical range, and it's not bad at all. The point of balance is also a little far from the handle, but I wouldn't say that's inaccurate. You can find historical swords that are quite forward-weighted. So overall, the maneuverability, a little heavy, but it's supposed to be heavy. So does it actually cut? So as you can see, this sword definitely gets the job done and can cut bottles, all day if you want. As far as I know, that's the factory edge. However, I should say that I borrowed this sword. I didn't purchase it. I borrowed it from my friend Jeremy Thomas, who runs the Joplin Pakmei Athletic Association. I'll link to his channel up above. And, this sword's pretty fun to cut with. I wouldn't say it's my favorite sword because I'm a stickler for historical accuracy and stuff. And I probably prefer my Scott Riddell cutting dowel, which, has a nicer scabbard and a few other bells and whistles. But for the price of this one being under $200, I think it's well worth the value if you want to just, cut some bottles. Alright everybody, thank you all for watching. Please subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, don't forget to stay sharp.